I'm Edie Lush, Executive Editor of Hub Culture. Really delighted to be back here in Davos at Hub Culture. We're inside a new building and I am here with the founder and the Chief Strategy Officer of Hub Culture, none other than Stalnaker. How are you?
What's up, Edie? It's great to be back in Davos again, right?
I know, and we're in a new news studio. You built a fantastic news studio in a new building. This is the Icon. Tell me about it.
Well, the Icon is a new study in what I think of as the mid-21st century. And it's designed to be the first regenerative building in Davos. And it has been designed as a kind of spaceship from the future. It has a lot of very interesting new technologies.
Yeah. Okay, a lot of new technologies come here from the future. What are they?
Well, one of the technologies is the foundation. So we're actually sitting on a hillside right now, on a slope, but it has a very special foundation that screws into the ground, which was designed with our partners for the build, a company actually called BYLD. And so
they are up next.
Yeah, and they are specialists in temporary construction. So the pavilion sits on these screws that gives it the ability to manage undulating terrain. But then above that, we've created what is essentially the Icon. It's a direct representation of our logo, the Hub Culture logo. You know, the Hub logo for many years, you know, since Hub was born, has sort of been our icon. And it represents a few things. Anybody who's seen it knows that there's like a kind of blue arc, and we think of that blue arc with regard to nature. And then
we've got nature all around us.
We're surrounded in trees right now.
Really beautiful.
Then there's a middle arc, which is really what we think of as infrastructure. There are 8 segments to that. And then
and
a
we're
center
sitting
commons.
in one of those infrastructures
so right now the studio is one of 8 pods that encirculate the building. And so the building itself is made up of 3 components. There's the base, there's pods, and then there's the skin. And the skin is designed to be a wide variety of different materials. This year it's all a kind of shingle, so it's very private and like a wood, but we've also been working on other forms of the facade, which will appear later in the future. But what's interesting is that they all attach to the pods and form the walls, essentially. And then the pods together are modular, and they can be moved, and they can actually adapt and change over time because they all link together at a certain angle to form a circle. And so the building has 32 outside angles, 16 inside angles that result in 8 pods and 1 commons. So it is really a portal. It is a seriously sacred geometry study in these things. But the goal...
Why is that important? Why is it important for it to have sacred geometry?
Well, you know, sacred geometry is really just geometry, right? All geometry is sacred in a way. But thinking about this concept of uniformity and mathematics in the building results in a frequency. And so some of the latest research in quantum and quantum physics and quantum manifestation, quantum reality, really looks at the frequency that a shape can generate. And so this building generates a very particular frequency because it's designed really as a portal. And the center of the building is lit actually not from windows that are on the side, but windows that are above. And so you can stand in the center of this building and feel as if you're outside, which is a very kind of, it's just incredibly amazing feeling to walk into a building and feel like you've stepped outside in some ways.
And I just want to touch on that idea around the commons being in the middle, because as we know, as the world progresses, as we go on in time, we are using so many resources. We're not respecting, in fact, the fact that we are a global commons. And a lot of the discussion here in Davos tends to be around how can we value nature, how can we give it, how can we bring it into what we think about when we're thinking about how to cost the earth, how can we think more about our resources. And what I've noticed about Hub Culture over the years is how those conversations happen almost through kind of, organized serendipity. But I love that it's the idea that it's the commons within Hub Culture that can also discuss the global commons.
And here I think we're respecting and elevating the concept and the very idea of the commons, because we are really putting into practice what we talk about in the shape of our logo. It has a lot of symbolism for us that has been built over essentially many years. When we launched the company, we didn't expect that symbol would come to mean so much, but like many things, it's taken nuance and layer over time. One of the things that I love about this building, when I talk about, we talk about the angles, that's kind of the quantum element. So tonight we're doing our opening ceremony, which will be a 108-minute meditation focused on essentially quantum creativity. So using the building as a vessel to be able to put energetic intention into it through humans, right? And then to be able to hopefully magnify the outcome of that. And so that's kind of fun. But beyond that,
108 minutes?
You'd have to ask the meditation teacher who's doing that, but basically it has to do with 108 minutes is a frequency for creativity. Okay. And, but that's kind of in the fun sort of opening of the thing where we're setting the intention of the building and setting the story and this archaeology. I love this concept of archaeology within our company because I think as a founder, when you are a founder, you almost care more about the history of a company than maybe other people do who don't know all the history. And so the really lovely thing for us the last couple of nights has been with our team. Our team meetings happen in the rotunda around in a full circle.
We had a great one last night.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
And we've sort of elementally enforced so much of what we do. The last thing I'd say really quickly on this is when we think about the mission of the building, if you go to hubicon.co, you can read a little bit about it and see a little bit about the building. But I think of this concept as the gas station of the 21st century.
Okay.
So this is the gas station of 2050. It's where you go to refuel a human and to refuel a vehicle. Because the concept of the hub icon is that it's also a charging station. The building is doing more than just acting as shelter. The building is an edge data center. The building is a regenerative charging station. So imagine that you arrive in your electric vehicle, you have between 5 and 45 minutes of dwell time. So instead of like being stuck in your car with that, or going into a Circle K, which let's be honest, a convenience store is not really a place that we want to be spending time necessarily. Right. This is the opposite of that. We're saying, let's take the charging, let's take the dwell time, and let's turn that into productive human time where people can build community and build interaction. So imagine in the future, it's time to charge your car, you go to the hub, you plug it in, you come inside, you get amazing coffee. We have the drinks here even from the future. We have Shilajit and Blue Lotus, and we have alcohol, but we're actually de-emphasizing alcohol, and we're looking at adaptogenics that will charge you up as a human. So imagine going to a charging bar for yourself while your car is charging, and then you have office and meeting space and connectivity to actually build wealth, to build collaboration, and to get work done. That's the vision. Like this is, I've been saying, it's the hubbiest hub we've ever hubbed.
Well, I love it, and this is the first, and there'll be more iterations in the future.
You'll be able to buy online. You'll be able to pick your components, and so if you want glass, if you want solar, there are many ways that it can manifest physically, but it's all part of a building system, and that building system allows almost no material for construction. The whole building is timber, and it clicks together in a kind of almost Lego-like format.
We're going to hear about that with our next guest, who is the architect. I want to focus a little bit on what hub culture is doing this week in Davos. We've got, actually, this isn't the only part of our
this is
operations,
1/5 of the campus,
right? But give us a sense that we saw our partners as the beginning of the live stream. Tell us a little bit about the themes that you are going to be exploring here, especially at the Icon, but elsewhere as well.
Well, beginning at the Icon, really there are kind of three major themes. We talked about quantum, we talked about regenerative, and we talked about, what we haven't talked about is health. So one of the, really the Icon is regeneration. Think about how do we regenerate the planet? And so we're doing something on COP30 and the upcoming meeting that will happen in Brazil. We brought our chef from the Amazon, from Belém.
Delicious food.
And she is like bringing these Amazonian flavors into the middle of the building. And that's happened, and it influenced some design elements. We wanted it to feel like there's a thread of the Amazon running through the center of this. We are doing a bunch of work on healthcare with foreign policy and the Merck on the future of cancer. We're working with the Davos Alzheimer's Collective and Handshake for a whole bunch of work around the future of the brain.
Brain health.
Yeah, brain health.
Super
and you'll be
important.
hearing a lot about brain health and your own mental status during the course of this week and what we can do to improve it, to take care of it, to sharpen it. And the drinks here reflect that. Shili
The adaptogens.
Yeah, the adaptogens are really about helping your brain function better. There's also amazing work that's happening, as I said, on quantum. So we're going to have Sandbox they're the Google spin-out that's working on the latest, deepest quantum research. We're doing some really, really fun stuff on a subject you wouldn't expect, which is steel. This
Yes.
building is timber and steel. We're hosting 2 big conversations with US Steel. They're the largest steel producer in the US.
Have been in the news recently.
They
The
have.
United States government did not allow a Japanese company to
Right.
take them over for national security reasons.
Absolutely. But we have US Steel here, and there are components of the building that were made with US Steel. And so this is a building that actually can showcase this kind of inflection point for US Steel about how do we get to circular steel? What does like carbon neutral steel look like? How do we actually rebuild the manufacturing base in America, which is a very big issue coming into the new administration, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about it. So I'm really excited to have US Steel here to kind of turn the page on the conversation and say, what could happen if we're looking at rebuilding the industrial base of the United States and even other countries in a new way? And looking at regenerative economics, regenerative practices, so that you're regenerating communities, right? So you have many communities, in particularly the United States, that haven't felt like they've been regenerative over the last
Right.
like 2 decades.
course.
What can we do to change that conversation and move that conversation forward? So those are some of the major things that we're going to be talking about. At the Ice House, we're doing a whole range of amazing AI stuff with prorata.ai, Imperial College. Like Tuesday is kind of AI day there. We're also at the Tech Lodge with MasterCard having some really great talk conversations about financial inclusion, all the work that MasterCard is doing to bring in the next 3 billion people to be able to have access to economic agency, and the work that the Center for Inclusive Growth and MasterCard is doing generally to drive the conversation. Now, it is true that AI is at the center of everything. I just walked down the promenade with you earlier.
Yeah.
It's
all
everywhere.
over.
And it's very much here too because we have our own AI initiatives. And
We're going to be talking to
that kind of
2
thing.
guests in a minute about that. Right, Stan, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for having me. And thanks for building this incredible new newsroom.
Yeah, I hope you like it.
I love it. Thank you very much. All right, stay with us. We're going to be back in a couple of minutes with our next guest. We're going to be speaking to the architect of the icon. Stay with us. I'm Edie Lush, Executive Editor of Hub Culture. We are live here in Davos 2025. Really pleased to be here with Raoul Skrein. He is the co-founder of BYLD and the founder of SKREINSTUDIOS and the architect of the icon where we are broadcasting from, which is fantastic. So tell me, let's talk big picture first of all. As a world, we're consuming too much. We are already breaching planet 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. It's getting worse. Every day we've had the latest figures out around the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. It's not looking good. As an architect and as somebody who builds things, puts new things on the planet, how do you have to think about that?
Well, in architecture, of course, we have a big responsibility in terms of carbon footprint on Earth. And let's say 10 years back, not many people considered architecture a place to start doing that. It was all about petrol and electric cars and all these things. And back then we started already figuring out that it's not only how you use a building, how much energy you use if you have solar panels on your roof, that makes a big difference, but most of your carbon footprint in construction is actually in the primary energy, in how you build the building, from what you build the building, from where is the stuff that you build your building of. So we put a lot of effort into that in the last decade, and we learned a lot. We researched a lot. We did a lot of work also with Foster and Partners in various different partnerships. And
including building a timber skyscraper, is that right?
Yeah, we did work on a skyscraper. It's a tall office building. It should be the tallest timber building in the world in Vienna, and that was a good benchmark because there we didn't look at it as designers and we wanted the pretty fancy building. We looked at it, how can we build the most sensible building for where we are in Austria, the country of timber engineering, where we have all this know-how and all this raw material right in front of our doorstep. And we said there was no question, there is more the question, why not build this out of timber?
Okay. So how do you, when you think about building sustainably and you think about you're involved in lots of big projects, right? So you've built the Red Bull offices outside of in Austria. You've built. Tell me about some of the other big buildings you've built.
So maybe one of our first large projects, if we're already in Switzerland, we back then we built the KPMG headquarters in Zurich, that was where we started the solo career after working together with Norman Foster and Bjarke Ingels and all of these front runners in architecture history even. And now we're working on several large-scale projects from SKREINSTUDIO, some of which are the Red Bull base in Austria, in Salzburg. And other nice projects in Spain, around Madrid, where we're based now, by the way. And it's an exciting year this year.
Super exciting. So you build these large projects, but in order to innovate, you have to iterate, and that means making mistakes. And I imagine it's very hard if you're making mistakes in a big project because the financial implications and the implications for all kinds of resources are pretty substantial. So you've taken a different tact in terms of building sustainably with places like the Icon. Tell me about how that came to be. How did you develop that idea?
That's a very good question because during COVID, my partners and I we came together, Arif and Nile, and
we'll speak to them tomorrow.
Exactly. They're on tomorrow, and we thought, how can we further innovate this sector? How can we move faster on it? And we figured out to do that we needed to scale down the, let's call it, subject as much as possible to the smallest possible unit, which we call the nucleus. which is basically the smallest possible bedroom with the smallest possible bathroom in a pod. And we used that size, that concept, as a test bed. So with this aspiration, we tried hundreds, I mean, not exaggerating, it were hundreds of different iterations, working with renowned international engineers like Arab and Climatric to get them working. And what we're trying to do is to figure out what is the most sensible thing to do if you want to build something in nature. If you want to be light on carbon, if you want to be light on operational costs, and operational cost is energy consumption in a way. So we use this as a test bed to figure these things out.
Amazing. So what have you learned in those test projects that you're using here in the Icon at Hub Culture?
So in all the years of research, we figured out a couple of interesting ways to be sensitive to the surrounding. One of which the icon here is sitting on screw pylons, which avoids the necessity of traditional, conventional foundations. No concrete involved. Everything is easy, removable. Another thing is prefabricating from local natural materials. So everything you see around is made in Switzerland, Swiss labor, Swiss timber, and therefore, I'm pretty sure the building is very close to being carbon neutral. We're still doing the calculations, but we have almost nothing that is not timber in here.
Extraordinary. And it's also flat packed, right? So in terms of storing it in between its uses or transporting it to its next home, it goes down into tiny IKEA-like packages.
Exactly. So within BYLD we specialize in modular construction, where we figured out that we need to be a little bit flexible on that. It depends on the country, it depends on the traffic rules, how to bring all the modules to where they need to go. Do you need to ship them? Do you need to put them into containers? So we figured out a way how you can flexibly pack them in flat packs. So you pack no air inside, and you can put them into containers and be more efficient. Or if it's just short term, you can also travel in volume modules, and basically the whole thing comes at once or in two pieces, depending on where you are, of course.
Extraordinary. And it's interesting if you think about where these pods are. In Switzerland, actually, the energy mix is very green. So Switzerland is lucky; it has a lot of hydro-powered power, and so connecting to the grid here is actually cleaner than in some other countries. So if you're in a place which doesn't have the delights of the Swiss power system, how do you treat the energy there?
So we operate in many different places, currently in South Africa, Egypt and Honduras, just mentioning a couple of them. And as you mentioned, being sustainable depends a lot on where you are, how the sun conditions, how the weather conditions, how clean is the grid, as you say. So usually we would try to be as offline from the grid as possible, just using it as an emergency supply, because usually in those countries that where people want to go for their natural beauty, those countries are also the ones with not so clean grids. So usually we would have central energy production, if that is from solar, or depending on where it is, other means. Which feeds into the cluster of the pods. Okay,
and very briefly, it's so interesting to me that when you're in hot places, like if I go on holiday and I want to go into one of your glamping pods, I'm probably going to be quite warm. And what's interesting is that AC is obviously one of the biggest causes of emissions, and you're able to use solar power to actually cool rather than warm one of the spaces. Tell me about that.
That's one of the systems. I mean, it took us years to figure this out, and I'm not saying that we're entirely there yet. It's a work in progress, and we're still researching on it. But we're working very hard to avoid conventional air conditioning because those suck the most energy,
Right.
and they're just not a comfortable thing to have in your room. It's always blowing, it's always sound,
Yeah.
and it dries out the air. So we figured out a way to actually do floor heating, but we cool the floor. But not only that, because we're working with lightweight structures that need to be transported from A to B. So the lighter they are, the more environmentally friendly they are at the same time. But to store energy in substance, you need weight. You need
Right.
dense materials. And the way you can mimic that and pretend a material is dense, but it's not, is for instance phase shifting materials. So it's a very simple reaction between a salty liquid from frozen to solid,
Interesting.
and it acts like half a meter of concrete in your room, which gives you this nice, cool, church-like feeling. If you
Amazing,
imagine
yeah.
when you sit in the church, you have this like coolness, even if it's very hot outside. And you can also heat it in winter, and you have this chimney, warm kind of feeling inside your room.
Extraordinary. All right, very, very briefly, Raoul, we've got to move on. What's next for you? What's coming up this year?
So we're currently building our global network of manufacturers and operators and landowners, of course, because what we want to do is we want to offer these solutions and figure out solutions to problems in different climate sectors, to bringing people closer to nature and to develop these nature experiences everywhere, but in a sustainable way and very, very sensible.
Fantastic. Raoul Skrein, thank you so much for building this incredible building here in Davos for Hub Culture. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Next up, David Shrier, and he's going to be talking to us about AI and energy. I am back. My name is Edie Lush. I'm here at Hub Culture in Davos in the news studio, joined by a favorite and recurring guest, David Shrier, professor of practice at Imperial College and managing director of Visionary Future. And you are always a predictor of the future, David. I want to talk a little bit about one of the big themes at the World Economic Forum, just across the road from where we are here, collaboration in an intelligent age. So as somebody who's really interested in ethical AI, in AI and energy, give me the broad strokes of what that theme means to you and how you work.
Well, thank you, Edie, and as always, it's a pleasure to be back with you. So I look at collaboration in an intelligent age through two lenses, right? So one lens that I look at it is from the expectation that if we're going to build these new and sophisticated AI systems and have them actually work for the benefit of society, we all have to work together. A lot of the most interesting code out there, a lot of the most interesting software out there is open source, where you have a community of people who all come together and they all work to create this really amazing thing. And so some of the most exciting AI, and certainly as we get into what we're going to talk about today, some of the things I'm very interested in is open source. That requires collaboration. The other thing that I find really interesting is something called swarm intelligence. And so I have a portfolio company called Orbu, which is an MIT spin-out from some work I had done with Sandy Pentland. And there we are taking the intelligence and the wisdom of thousands of people, and we're boiling it down into predictions of the future with the help of AI. And so this is really exciting because basically there are certain things that people and AI can do together that AI can't do alone and people can't do alone. So Orbu was able to correctly predict that Trump would blow out the US election, that was not going to be a close race. It was able to correctly predict the US 10-year Treasury yields 3 months in advance, and it was able to correctly predict unemployment and do it far better than either the #1 investment bank on Wall Street or a famous prediction market called Polymarket. So I'm really excited by this concept because it plays out both in sort of the broader fabric of humanity through this kind of collaborative and open source AI, but also specifically through some of the work that I'm doing with my portfolio.
You haven't retired yet, though, so I'm imagining there's still a little bit of work to do on there.
Yes, absolutely.
So I wonder about when we think about ethics and AI, morality is in some ways a global concept, and in some ways it's actually quite local. So when you think about ethics and AI as we develop these intelligent machines or intelligent algorithms, whatever you want to call them, there's a lot of difference, and there are different standards between countries, even in Europe, which feels homogenous from the outside, but actually isn't.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this is something that we grapple with a lot as we're now starting to automate ethics. We're trying to embed it inside of code. So a few reflections on this idea. First of all, the people who decided what ethics and values go into, let's say, ChatGPT or Google Gemini, we're talking about half a dozen people who all live and work in Silicon Valley and probably are between 28 and 32 years old and have a similar educational background. And so that's one particular lens.
Many of whom are men.
Many of whom are men.
Most of whom are white.
And it's this sort of world-spanning technology which is decided by a very small number of homogenous people.
Yeah.
So that's one point of concern. The second point to kind of reflect on is in some areas, in some regions, there is a certain amount of commonality. So colleagues of mine from Harvard and Yale put together an analysis. So Joshua Cals at Harvard and Luciano Floridi at Yale put together an analysis on kind of common ethics and morals across 42 countries. They were able to boil it down into like 5 basic principles that AI should express or be built around that reflect common values. So that's sort of interesting, and you'll see a different set of common values. So that was mostly Western European and Western European derived countries, and you'll see a different set of values from countries that are not coming from Greco-Roman philosophy. So like in the Asia-Pacific region, you may see another set of values that common but yet different than the ones in Europe. But then when you get down to the fine detail, let's say, for example, on the issue of safety and security versus privacy. So London is very concerned about terrorism and terrorist attacks, and they put up the Ring of Steel, and they put up CCTV cameras all over London.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. So when the backpack bombers blew up the bus, within 48 hours or so, they were able to identify the bombers because they had all the CCTV footage. On the other hand, just across the channel in Germany, there's a much greater priority for personal privacy, even at the expense of security. And so that's just in a highly localized area, two countries that are nominal allies, yet very, very different views on something as fundamental as privacy. And so if you play that through everything that AI can do, you find out that yes, there are some global things, but AI quickly gets very local because it's so intimate.
Let's talk about some of your predictions. You said that in 2023, AI could add 10% to global GDP by 2032.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this statement in 2025?
I believe that we are still tracking somewhere between, so 10% would be 1% a year over 10 years, and in other words, doubling global GDP growth. And right now, I think we're tracking somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. So that was the bull case forecast.
Right.
According to my colleagues at Evercore ISI, who I did this report with, they tell me we're tracking exactly for the base case. So we haven't yet hit that takeoff moment. I do see signs that it's starting to accelerate. So we may see starting to grow into that curve. But right now, we're tracking more closer to 0.5% than 1% per year.
All right.
But still tracking for significant growth, because we're talking trillions of dollars.
We're minutes away almost from the inauguration, a switchover in the administration in the United States. And there was a lot of concern around the technology companies around what the new administration was going to do around AI in the United States. But the Biden administration surprised everybody, got in there first. Tell us what happened and why it's so important.
Absolutely, and it wasn't just the tech companies, it was also countries. So probably about maybe close to a year ago or so, my colleague Aldo Faisal, who I think you're going to speak to.
He's going to come in a minute.
He's on next. My colleague Aldo and I put together a white paper on sovereign AI. And we wrote this because countries from Europe to Asia were coming to us and saying, we are worried that Donald Trump will engage in unilateral policy action and cut off access to this AI technology. And we need to prepare for that. We need to have more control over our AI. In addition, these countries would say to us, you know, our local values are not being reflected in AI that's written by those 6 people who are mostly 29-year-old white men sitting in Silicon Valley.
Right.
I'm here, let's say, in Malaysia, and my local values and my local culture and language is not being reflected in the AI that I'm getting. So how do I address that? So a number of countries have asked us to do this. Malaysia has a very large payments company called PayNet, which is partly owned by the central bank. They funded our work. And we really dove into this topic of sovereign AI. And we put together a white paper, which you can download at aicollab.org, so aicollab.org. And it explains to you how you need to approach this if, let's say, the US cuts off access, as we just saw. So the Biden administration said only 18 countries will have unlimited access to the most advanced technology. And the other 170 some odd countries will either have restricted access or no access at all to the latest NVIDIA chips or the most advanced software. And there are exceptions and there are lots of caveats around this, but it was a striking statement by the US government and very reflective of the facts that progressive nations ranging from Denmark and Germany to Malaysia and Japan have been investing increasingly in their own AI capacity to be able to have some control over their destiny.
And collaboration seems to be one of the recommendations that's come out. If we could see, we may see countries, and we're already seeing this in places like the GCC in the Middle East, countries collaborating around an AI framework, AI developing policy, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're expecting to see traditional trade groups like the GCC or ASEAN in the Asia Pacific region or African Union, that these trade groups will start to overlay technology collaboration on top of their trade collaboration, because the value of the future is going to be driven as much by bits as it is by atoms.
Interesting. I want to touch on the other area that I know that you're here talking about. It's an area that I'm absolutely fascinated about, which is AI and energy.
Absolutely.
Tell me what we're not seeing in terms of the use that AI has of our resources, energy, water. What's the worry?
Well, the basic idea is our utility grid, both the ability to supply energy and the ability to supply water, is already strained. And then when we add to that all this extra demand of this technology that's starting to grow exponentially, we have real problems. We are very close to getting to a point where a country will need to decide, do I run my AI systems or do I give people air conditioning? Do I run my AI systems or do I have rolling blackouts? Do I have lights on in my city? And so,
or do I run my AI systems and everything else and go back to coal? Or stay on coal for longer.
And we are actually seeing a dramatic increase in the use of fossil fuels because it's the only thing that could be turned on quickly to keep up with this exploding AI demand. So the big tech companies, the Magnificent Seven, have started to walk back some of their progress in sustainability because they're trying to keep up with all of this AI demand. So Google, Microsoft, and Meta have had greater than a 100% increase in electricity usage over the last 4 years because of all these AI data centers. So these are power-intensive systems, and sustainability is having trouble keeping up. So we added 500 gigawatts of sustainable power to the grid last year globally, just training GPT-4, which is kind of the underpinnings of current ChatGPT. Just training GPT-4 was 49 gigawatt hours. And that's just training it. The use of it is even more power. And so you have hundreds of millions of people, now billions of people, starting to use these systems. They want the answers, they want to work with the AI, but it's consuming a lot of electricity. Water is another one. And so every time you run a query in one of these LLMs, it's like you're drinking a bottle of water. It's used to cool the systems. And so countries that have more water resource availability are going to have an AI advantage in the coming years.
So tell me briefly who those are.
Well, so some of the countries, so we did a scan and we looked at kind of energy readiness, and Sweden tops the list. So Sweden, Australia, and Canada are three countries at the very top of the list that are very energy ready to deal with the AI revolution. Malaysia is in the top 10. So Malaysia is adding 500 gigawatts to its power grid over the next 5 years. So the Singapore data centers actually are operating in Malaysia.
Interesting. Fascinating. David, we might have you back later in the week because I want to talk more about this. But David, thank you very much for joining us here in Hub Culture. It's always an absolute delight to have you as a partner. Stay with us because we will be back with a little bit more on AI and even more coming out of the WEF. I'm Edie Lush, absolutely delighted to be here at Hub Culture in Davos. It's 2025. Really pleased to have onto the evening show, the first ever Hub Culture Davos evening show, Aldo Faisal. He is a professor of AI and neuroscience at Imperial College, director of the School of Human Intelligence, director of the largest center of healthcare in the United Kingdom, a professor in Germany in digital health, and has just joined the German Ethics Council, which is an advisory and standards center setting. Really interested in obviously in artificial intelligence, in the future. You've got a lot of things we could talk about. Let's start with some of what I was talking about with your colleague David Shrier around this idea of sovereignty of AI, sovereignty of data. Give me the big picture of why it's so important that people listening should think about this.
Thanks, that's a great question, Edie. So you may all remember this analogy that we had in the context of developing countries. You know, you give a man a fish and you have to feed him every day, and then you give that man a fishing rod, and then the man can fish for himself. And now we're bizarrely in the reverse situation, where we're basically asked to hand over our fishing rods and buy fishes for the rest of our life. And that's because we see a tremendous concentration of generative AI technology, ChatGPT-like technology, that is maintained and produced by very few select companies sitting in a certain region of the world. And the challenge that I see here, and there are multiple aspects to that. One is it's in a different country. That country can impose tariffs or export controls, and so it may make this technology very expensive. It may actually influence the way we can be effective for performing as an economy, be that in Britain, Germany, or anywhere else in the world. And so I think what we need to have about sovereign AI, the idea is that we're developing our own models. And we need them, so we can do white-collar stuff work, writing text, understanding, digesting information at the generative AI level, but at the same time that we actually retain the capabilities of still building this technology. So these generative AI systems are so big that there are probably only 1,000, 2,000 people on the planet who know actually how to train these AI systems, because they require so much compute power. There's whole new strategies being developed, and if you're not making them yourselves, you don't know how to do that actually. So we can teach, so as professors in university or AI students, you know, this is how you should do in principle, but the actual know-how of getting it done is completely different. And it's a bit like, you know, you can learn in a physics course how a nuclear bomb works, but actually building one is much, much harder. And in the case of AI, we are losing the connection with that. And that means we'll be dependent on a select few companies who know how to do that, and we'll be dependent on having access to their technology.
So what does that mean for a country sitting in Europe, for example, that may be facing tariffs from the new American administration? What would you advise that country to do in terms of building its own AI framework?
Yeah, so David Shrier and I put out this white paper that we developed with colleagues also in Zurich, Stanford, MIT. You can find it on sovereign-ai.org. That basically lays out what are the technological requirements, what are the energy requirements, what are the team requirements, what are the data requirements to build that. I think the critical thing is to make the decision to want to have such a system, and not, just basically start buying fish.
Subscribe to OpenAI.
Whatever company, and you just subscribe for life for that. And I think most people, including myself, have not yet fully understood how transformative generative AI is going to be for white-collar service-type work. And so, if you go to the presentations here, like imagine you can hire 1 million PhDs and they'll work at a fingertip in a second's notice. Well, that productive capacity you may not have access to. And if there are tariffs on it, you suddenly pay 30% more for that equivalent workforce in your country. And so even if your own AI in your own country is not so powerful, it doesn't matter. It's already something that takes you a long way in that direction. And then you can use that to, for example, validate the other AIs, because AIs are so complex that only AIs will be able to check whether AIs do the right thing. And here it comes, the idea of Europe is also an idea of unions and federations or commonwealths. And what we are promoting is this formation of a federation of sovereign AI. So we want everyone to build their own sovereign AI. We want to help them. We're providing information. So this website I mentioned, sovereign-ai.org, will have information, repositories, link up experts, data sources that will enable people to take these steps. But then what we want to do is also say, okay, you have a bit of compute, I have a bit of compute, that country has a bit of compute. That compute is restricted.
Compute means ability to process queries, it means energy, it means water? What does
it means something that we call GPUs. So that's basically what makes the AI think. And you don't need it so much to process stuff, but you need a lot of that to train it.
Okay.
And that's one of the most coveted resources. There's a finite amount of these units being produced on the planet.
And you've got to have the NVIDIA chips, is that right?
And that's the famous NVIDIA chips. And last year, 600,000 were bought by Meta, 1 million were produced in total. So that's 2/3 of the global production. And so many European countries may have 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 of these GPUs. But if you bring all the European countries and all the other countries who are interested in this technology together, you can get to 100,000 GPUs maybe. 100,000 GPUs is what OpenAI had back in the day.
Crumbs.
Right? But it's already something that allows you to build systems, because as we're progressing, we're also learning how to build generative AI systems that are smaller but as smart. Right? So we're getting in that direction, but it's about working together. And of course, this being Davos, we also have a spirit that we also want to have certain minimum set of values. So in a world that's becoming increasingly multipolar, and you cannot build on certain sets of values to be enshrined. The idea of our federation of sovereign AIs is that we can, basically, if you want to be part of this club, you need to subscribe to some minimum standards about ethics, about privacy, that allows you to become part of this club. It's basically the Wikipedia or open source idea.
Right.
And so we want to support that. And that's our contribution to making the world, even though it's becoming more multilateral, still sort of be based on certain values and standards.
Fascinating. You are an expert in health and artificial intelligence. Health is one of the big issues here at Hub Culture this week. So I'd love to dive into some of the work that you're doing. Tell me a good story. Tell me a good news story about AI and health.
So I think there are 3 projects we're currently working on, and that's actually not just me as an member of the institution, but actually that we're leading from our laboratory. So one is something that we call the AI clinician. So that's the vision. Some people may remember Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah,
there was this holographic doctor, the Doctor.
Yeah.
And that doctor said that I was trained by the data of millions of doctors training humans, and that stuck with me. And so then it took me roughly 12 years to work out how to actually do that. And in the UK, we have this unique data set because we have a national healthcare service that has integrated that data already. So at Imperial, we have roughly access to some 10 million patient records. Not just one record, we have that for the past decade. And so if you know everything that a doctor does to a patient, prescribing something, doing a treatment with them, and how the patient responds to them, because you have their blood work, you have their x-rays and so forth, you can start building AIs that are learning from this interaction between patient and doctor how to interact with patients. And so the AI clinician, we started, quote, quote, small. We started working on intensive care and treating the biggest killer in intensive care. It's called sepsis. It's an infectious condition that you have that kills people. Every person with COVID in hospital died from sepsis, for example. We're talking 40 million people a year. And that system has learned how to treat sepsis in such a way better, making always the single right decision in the many decisions that you need to make in intensive care, that we believe can reduce the mortality of patients in that space by roughly 8%.
Extraordinary. I live in the UK. I actually had surgery, robot-assisted surgery a year ago, was able to save my kidney because the surgeon could work very well with the robot. So I'm a huge fan of AI-assisted surgery. I also get frustrated in the United Kingdom because my data doesn't actually follow me everywhere. And I balance that with what you were saying a moment ago about data and privacy and the need to keep some things private, need to keep some things personal. Sometimes I'd quite like my next doctor to see the scan from the other hospital.
Yeah, so that's what I always call the egoism of the healthy. If you're healthy, if you have no problem, you want to keep your data private, right? Because you're fine, health is fine. But the moment you're unwell,
please share my data.
And I work with many patients who suffer from rare diseases, from deadly diseases. They say, like, please take my data and find a way of helping me.
Right.
And that's, I think, how we need to think about that. And I think the challenge here is how can we do that in an equitable way? How can we do that just not taking your data and you get nothing for it? And so we have done a number of projects in that space where, for example, we've developed technology that immediately gives the patient something back. If they give us their data, they get something useful out of it. Like information about how they're doing currently with respect to people like them, of their age, of their gender, or whatever group, for example. And that's, I think, an important aspect. And that important aspect is we're doing this as an academic institution. And so universities, from that perspective, are very interesting because we're a neutral ground player. We're not a for-profit place. And this means we can get very different data sources together. Right? We can get data from the healthcare system. We can get data from supermarkets, for example. And so one project that we had in our center was on the early detection of ovarian cancer. And we worked with the supermarket chain Tesco. They're very big in Britain.
It used to be that something like 1 out of every 5 pounds in the UK was spent at Tesco.
Exactly. And so they were the first to introduce this Tesco Club card that basically measures what you have bought. And so we had access to the shopping baskets of women. And so my colleague basically managed to get a hold of this data. And then we found some 100+ women who had ovarian cancer, willing us to give us access to their shopping data.
Wow.
And of course, their medical record. And we could detect that subtle changes, AI could detect with subtle changes in shopping behavior 8 months before the diagnosis that they were going to have ovarian cancer.
Wait, what were the changes?
That's now exciting. So here you need to understand AIs look at things very differently in an abstract way, but I can render it intuitive. So ovarian cancer or onset of ovarian cancer gives you effectively bloating. So out go the cabbages, out go the beans, baked beans, big thing in Britain.
Yeah.
And you start taking things that give you relief from irritable bowel syndrome and things.
Right.
So that's the human intuition why you can, from subtle changes and things, start detecting this information. And so we believe that if we can just aggregate more information about people, using the very esoteric word holistic, we can use AI to really think about health holistically. If I know how you move, who you talk to, how you talk to, what you shop, what you do, plus I get your blood work, where you're getting that, I think we can build a much better picture of your health state. We call that a digital twin. And that allows us to track how you're doing. And that becomes really important if you want to think about healthcare not as a system where sick people are being treated for money and are being cured, but if you want to prevent people from getting sick. So prevention, what we call public health, that's actually the best driver to reduce cost in the healthcare system, is preventing people from getting cancer, from getting heart attacks. And so I think that's really the biggest driver in impact that AI can have. And in the UK, we have this unique opportunity to deliver that.
Fascinating. Do you think it matters who's doing it? Because I imagine there's a difference in thinking, I'm happy to share my data with Imperial College. Aldo seems like a nice guy. Aldo seems like a nice guy. And Google, who I may not trust as much. And does it matter who's getting your data and what they're doing with it?
So we're seeing it does matter to patients. So we do a lot of what we call patient participation engagement. So patients are from day one part of our research teams. We get volunteers and they comment on stuff. We've done also some studies in the space of digital mental health. So dealing with depression using apps, for example. The patients were happier to give us data than if we told them this is a corporate app versus this is a university app. So that makes a difference. We set up something we called the HDR Discover Now hub at Imperial that basically brings for Northwest London all the patient data together, and researchers can access it now. And we had to write letters to every single household. and asking them, telling we're doing this, we're doing good stuff here, but you can opt out. And hardly anyone opted out because there was this trust in the healthcare system, the trust that this is an academic project, and people wanted to do that. And public health is ultimately in the remit of the state or the government or the nation, if you want to call that. And so that's an interesting space for us to explore.
And can it change primary health care? Because there's obviously a squeeze on that in the United Kingdom, as in many countries in the world.
Well, ironically, we're just publishing this week, it's going to probably come out, a paper in Lancet, where we're showing that if you have all the aggregate healthcare data, administrative records of patients, and we've done this in the country of Wales, which has 4 million inhabitants, and we had the data, we can predict 3 months ahead if you're ending up in hospital.
Wow.
And so now we were surprised that works, just using administrative data. And so now we're needing to work with the healthcare authorities. Said, okay, I have this information now, I can predict.
It's coming your way.
What do we do? Do we tell the patient? Do we tell the GP?
Yeah.
Or do we tell the healthcare authorities? Someone should know about that. And now it's about how to deliver a system that now can provide this solution. And so I think it will change primary care. It may help people prioritize and do other things differently.
Fascinating. Aldo, thank you so much for coming on the Hub Culture Evening News Show, the first ever live streamed here in Davos. I'm Edie Lush.